Hello everybody, welcome to Dot Dot News. I'm Jonathan. Today we have invited a very special guest who is a macroeconomic scholar and a former strategic advisor to the chairman of Abu Dhabi Executive Office. He is also one of the 15 rising global leaders selected by the Asia Global Institute to participate in the Asia Global Fellows Program at the University of Hong Kong. Please welcome Mr. Hashim.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you. So, as you might have noticed, after the closing of the 20th National Congress of the CPC in China, there is a worldwide coverage from the Western mainstream media, sort of undermining the China's economic situation. So, what is your view of the current economic situation in China?
Well, the Chinese economy has a lot of potential. If you look at the numbers over the last 40 years since the reform and open up initiated by Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s. If you look at the numbers up until since that time until 2008, the average annual growth of the Chinese economy was around 10%. And since then, so over the last 10 years, the average growth of the Chinese economy has been 6.6%. And that's really double the global average, and also a lot higher than the economic growth rate of the emerging economies, which was around 3%, 3.5%. And in the United States and in Europe, especially in the United States, anything Chinese is actually portrayed negatively.
Yes.
If you really only rely on, let's say American sources, unfortunately nowadays it's not really easy to find pundits, scholars, and also some economists who would be looking at the Chinese economy objectively.
What do you think about the West nowadays? Are they doing well economically, or is it they are facing some sort of crisis or some difficulties at this moment?
If you look at the US, for example, the inflationary pressures are actually increasing, and the recessionary pressures also are increasing. And recently we know that the Fed increased the interest rate by 75 basis points to 4%. And one part of the reason for this decision was the rising inflation in the United States. And the United States over the last decade has been having difficulty really pushing the economic growth up. And this is also related to what a lot of people, a lot of economists and experts say, it's a secular stagflation. Basically, you have high inflation and you have either plateauing economic growth or declining economic growth. The authorities, the monetary authorities in the United States are having difficulty how to really manage this situation, and to really overcome that challenge, there have to be some very hard decisions to be made by the authorities, and these decisions are either to really increase the interest rate, and as a result of that increase, you will basically contain the economic growth, so you will be you're not going to be able to stimulate the economy. So there are a lot of challenges in the United States, and historically, if you look at the economic situation of the United States, whenever the inflation is more than 5% and the unemployment is less than 5%, you will have a hard landing. You will have a recession. And if you look at the current situation, the inflation rate is already more than 8%, and the unemployment is less than 4%. Because for a period of time at the beginning of the pandemic, some economists were actually saying the high inflation rates are really transitory, and we will get back to normal, and the rate will come actually down. But now there's a consensus that in the United States, the inflation is not really transitory, it's actually permanent.
But do you think the Biden administration, as I know they have sort of implemented some kind of policy to deal with the inflation, do you think it will work? What do you think about the administration?
So as I said, it's the monetary authorities in the United States are in this dilemma It's a very difficult situation to be in, and it's also very hard to really foresee that the economic or the economy of the U.S. will actually have a soft landing, basically avoiding the recession. And if you look at the numbers for the first half of this year, the U.S. actually technically was already in recession. The first quarter and the second quarter, the U.S. actually had a negative growth. So the first quarter it was negative 1.6, and in the second quarter it was 0.6, negative 0.6. And if you look at the numbers for the next year, comparing China with United States in this case, the second largest economy and the first largest economy, China is expected to grow by 4.4%, whereas United States is actually expected to grow by a mere 1%. And also that's not really guaranteed with the inflationary pressures and recessionary pressures. It looks like, also this is the consensus of a lot of economists, that it looks like the likelihood of a recession, a formal recession, will actually be high.
If we go back to China, and from what we know so far, the economy rebounded significantly in the third quarter, all right? And from the global point of view, China's economic performance is still outstanding. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. The Chinese economy has been the stabilizer of the global economy. So in the third quarter, the Chinese economy grew by 3.9%. That's basically 3.5 percentage points over the previous quarter, which was 0.4%. And if you look at the potential of the Chinese economy, one thing that you have to also keep in mind when really analyzing the Chinese economy and also the future prospects of the Chinese economy, you have to look at the R&D investment, for example. It's already gone beyond 2% of the GDP. It's 2.4%. And it's already investing in R&D more than Europe as a whole. And also you have to look at the urbanization rate. The urbanization rate in China is around 63.4%. And if you compare China and United States, it's more than 80% in United States versus 63.4%. In Europe, it's 75%. The reason I'm bringing this up, because if you look at these numbers, and if you look at the middle class, for example, the middle class in China is already more than the entire population of United States. Is 400 million people in the middle class. And then if you look at the consumer market in China is less than a third of the consumer market in United States. So that gives you the indication that actually the Chinese economy and its consumer market has so much potential. In 2011, I had the opportunity and the privilege to actually work on the Chinese five-year plan of number 12 at that time. I remember when I first actually read and started actually analyzing the report, because at that time the Chinese consumption of energy was actually increasing and the production of energy domestically was actually decreasing. So there was this a gap widening. And at the same time also at that time I actually looked at the carbon intensity of the economy, how to reduce it. Anyway, the reason I'm actually highlighting these points because all these objectives, all these targets put in the number 12 five-year plan, put then around 13 years ago, they have been actually
met the target, you know.
Exactly. And so going back to the point of the five-year plans of China, so over the last 40 years since Deng Xiaoping's opening up and reform program, the Chinese have been relying on 4 transformations: marketization, industrialization, internationalization, and urbanization.
Urbanization.
Right. So these four transformations have actually, to a high degree, have been actually achieved. The targets for them. Now going forward, looking at the future, and what President Xi Jinping mentioned in his speech at the CPC's 20th National Congress, the new transformations for the Chinese economy will be consumption, services, digitization, and AI. The Chinese authorities and the Chinese policymakers and strategists are thinking about really quality development. And this was literally mentioned in the speech given by President Xi Jinping recently at the 20th National Congress. And also, if you look at other things that really he mentioned and also embedded in the 14th five-year plan, which was recently released, the Chinese economy is not going to close. The opening up of the Chinese economy will actually continue. In fact, if you just read carefully the statements made by the president and other economists, Chinese economists, you see that in his speech, the President Xi Jinping said specifically that we will let the market forces really decide the allocation of resources, and we will be deepening our reform of the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. And we will be looking at the supply side of the economy, really reforming it and enhancing it, and so on and so forth. So all these are indications that the future of the Chinese economy, or at least the intentions and the objectives for the future of the Chinese economy, are really on solid grounds. And also having this clarity, the clarity of the direction, the sense of direction, the clarity of vision allows the Chinese to really rally behind this mission, behind this vision to achieve their objectives. So hopefully, looking at the numbers, it looks like some people really say the Chinese not going to be able to achieve their economic objectives, but there are some objective analysts who actually look at the numbers and say by the end of this decade, the Chinese economy will be the largest in nominal terms. It's already the largest in PPP terms.
But as a foreigner, okay, who has a significant knowledge of the modern China's politics and economy, okay, and will you encourage other foreigners, let's say the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, to come to China and invest in China? Do you encourage them?
Yeah, of course. This is what I mentioned earlier. The future, the economic center of gravity is actually moving eastwards. And the Chinese economy is only going to grow further. The potential of the Chinese economy is really huge, and it's not been tapped fully. For the investors who are actually interested in actually just investing or entrepreneurs who are interested in setting up businesses, China, the Greater Bay Area, Shanghai, Beijing, and other provinces or regions are really ideal for investment and also for doing profitable business. One thing that the investors, potential investors, potential businessmen and businesswomen will have to keep in mind when really trying to understand China is to really objectively look at the Chinese economy and its growth potential in the future, and not be influenced by the negative stories that are really coming up in the international media, and they have to come and see by themselves what's going on, and also the dynamism of the Chinese economy.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Hashman. I'm very much looking forward for you to coming back to Dot News to share your point of view with us. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you.